Is an unplugged session, which is designed more to be in a small room like this, more of us kind of interactive opportunity to kind of do a little bit more on the Q&A side and just kind of figure out what you'd like to hear from. We've always got a bunch of kind of prepared content and things like that. I'm going to freak Erica out because I do actually have some slides, but only for a few minutes worth because I just wanted to frame a couple of things, explain a couple of things, and then what I want to do then is try and spend almost all of our time more on interactive Q&A. And so when we get there, I'll kind of take some questions, we'll kind of group them together, and we'll kind of hit those. Anything is fair game. So first I wanted to talk a little bit about just background-wise. What are we working on? What are we building? What are we trying to accomplish? First thing, this is kind of how I think of the Visual Studio world. We have a bunch of Microsoft businesses that we are supporting. All these platforms you want to write code for. So whether it's SharePoint, Xbox, get the game connector and creator, F12 tools and Internet Explorer, all the rest of these sort of things. I want to make sure that we're producing a really great set of tools, the runtimes to go with it, things like that. Like I said in the keynote, it's about being able to leverage your skills and go to each one of these new platforms. That way, when you have to go make a move to one of them, you can go do that. So we've got a bunch of the team that basically spends their time going with the platform teams, trying to figure out how do I make you successful, building software for whatever platform that happens to be. This picture right here is the more complicated version of the one you didn't see at the keynote. I drew that in PowerPoint, believe it or not, to which I showed it to my team, and they were both kind of impressed and immediately reminded me that I was losing my developer DNA, and I better get back in the debugger right away, because if you're able to do that in PowerPoint, you're probably getting a little bit too good at PowerPoint. So we need to get you back into the code a little bit more. But this is kind of like the full version of what I've seen. When you have a great marketing team, it looks like this, which is probably a little bit simpler, a little bit more approachable, probably a little bit cleaner. But I think by the time you get down to it, this is probably a little bit like a double click down on the diagram to see like what's actually under there. And as I kind of look at how we're writing software and how things are going, and you look at our vision, our strategy, we really are trying to make sure that this entire cycle goes as efficiently as it possibly can. Because at the end of the day, this is probably the way you are actually building software. You're getting requirements, you're planning it out, you're doing milestones. If you're doing any kind of a sprint kind of development cycle, there's probably even an inner circle inside of the dev cycle, which each sprint is kind of going back and forth. I create some incremental, ship unit, a version I want to release. It goes through acceptance testing. And then I get it out there, deployed, monitoring, and then like you saw at the keynote, that kind of back channel that says, hey, something failed. Let's go figure out what the heck that looks like. And today, you may have different teams doing this, using different tools. Maybe you got Word docs for one part, email for a bunch of the other parts, and and some folks will have very sophisticated sort of things. But when I look at it, every single time you make a hop, you hit one of those chevrons on there, and it goes from one person to another. There's an opportunity for those two to get disconnected or out of sync, or things like that. That's going to slow you down. This is the collaboration thing that I was talking about before. And again, this kind of picture from the keynote, just is a very simple kind of here's how you throw everything together. But this is really what we've been trying to build for a very long time. So professional tools, core set of stuff. I can write, file a new project, get a bunch of kind of stuff going, but I want to kind of pull everybody into that loop. We've been working on it for quite a while. Those core principles that we talked about, I won't go through these again because they were in the keynote, but the collaboration one, clearly very, very important. How many people follow lean software methodologies? People in that? Oh, 3 or 4 people. Yeah, a little more, about 10, 15. Yeah, so again, this notion of waste anytime you get anybody in that loop. That's the collaboration thing. It's the flow of the content through the entire picture. And then the tooling behind that with the actionable feedback. So every new release would come along and say, is there another person that we want to bring in? How can we get you involved? We use the same kind of techniques for those, get everybody kind of working together with the same content. And then we talked about, for this release, that includes the stakeholders. That's the product management thing. When Cameron and I did the back and forth thing, how do I specify the product, get the feedback on it, and then on the operations side. And I'm pretty excited about the operations piece because I've wanted to have that for a really long time. And so we've made, I think, a very good start with the plugin, the connector that's up there. But there's a total amount of new stuff we can add on top of that. We'll make it even better as we get going. So that's a little bit of the kind of what. Pro Tools, application lifecycle management, making things a little bit more there. And frankly, we have a ton of area that we cover. So I didn't talk about the CLR, I didn't talk about a bunch of the framework stuff. Clearly we're innovating there, a bunch of stuff on the devices and things like that. Those might be good topic areas that we can have a good conversation about as well. Now on the how, I get a lot of questions on the how, because I own the Visual Studio. One of my jobs is also making sure we can plan out these releases, the stuff that you download and all the rest of that. How the heck do you guys do that? I get a lot of questions about that. So I thought I'd throw out a couple of examples here. First of all, we do start off with major releases. Usually I'm going to kick one of these things out when I need to make a big change to the core, changes to the file format, schemas for databases, those sorts of things, right? Those you don't want to just toss out to somebody every 6 weeks. That's going to cause them into turmoil. So we want to have a big release for that. We may also add a big brand new area. A good example of that in the last release was all of our SharePoint tooling in VS 2010. Okay, so a good example of that. And those are going to happen on some periodicity. It's not a set pattern. It's not I'm shooting for exactly 24 months or exactly 36 months or what does that look like. But you can see our kind of 2005, 2008, 2010, it's pretty easy to see where we've kind of landed, and it kind of depends on what we're building, the complexity of it, which platforms we're also trying to align with and help and things like that. And that'll basically roll up everything in between. Now, in between, though, that's not good enough. I talked to a lot of customers that, look, I really like the fact that every some number of years, I can go get the latest version of Visual Studio, and it's got everything in it that I want, because I'm less interested in downloading all this other sort of stuff. But there are other folks that are very much on the, I've subscribed to Scott's blog. Scott's shipping something every 3 weeks. I need to go download it right away. Scott Guthrie. I feel like sometimes maybe I got to subscribe to his blog to see what he's shipping next week. He's going really, really fast. It's very, very fast. But it's good. He's being very agile. It turns out my team's doing the same. We've got power tools, feature packs. These are things that are relevant to the last version we shipped. You can just download them. You can use the Tools Extension Manager, go pull those things down, and it kind of fills out some areas that maybe didn't quite make the release or something that were very common requests. We get those in there. By the time we get to the next major release, then we ship those. Same thing with the platforms. If you remember that wheel with all those platforms in there, that's a heck of a lot of platforms to go target. So we've shipped like about 8 or 9 versions of the Azure tools in the last 2 years. On average, about one every 4 months by the time you average it out. We've done a few versions of the Windows Phone tools as well, and you saw maybe at Mix and on stage during the demo, we showed you the new tools that are coming out there with geolocation and some updates to the editor, or the emulator, I should say. Good examples of that. So those come out in between, and then we roll those up. So that's the general, kind of idea. Now, I just wanted to give you a little bit of a sense, again, on the how part of this, to give you a little peek behind the scenes of what the heck are you guys doing. You got 2,000 engineers out there. They're all kind of, typing away, building features. How the heck do you keep all these guys, on track? As well as I can, sometimes I don't. So, we have to do other milestone things. But I wanted to give you a feeling for how do we actually approach that, just kind of like a behind-the-scenes sort of standpoint. We start off doing a lot of the same kind of planning you do, which is the, customer scenarios. What problems are people facing? How can I solve that problem? What would that look like? What are the experiences that would be in that? How does that kind of flow down so that at the end of the day you can do that? As an example, the stuff that we showed on Monday, we asked, hey, there's a customer problem of how do you get design requirements, the kind of, the requirements management piece of this, so that when a stakeholder wants something built, that the dev team will build what they want. And we started off with that at the top level as a scenario, right? And the value proposition is, wouldn't it be great if we could actually share what the design looks like very quickly? And we could get the feedback, and it was in a nice tight cycle. Yes, it would. So what would that experience look like? Well, if I came in and actually use PowerPoint, that would be a great way to kind of go off and accomplish that. Then you get down into features, which is the storyboard plugin for PowerPoint, make it so I can drag and drop, make it so I can do screen capture, and then again, hook up the scenario. So I mean, it's that sort of a thing. Hopefully at the end of the day, if you had a customer problem, pain point, this will wind up actually solving it for you. Internally, once again, peek behind the scenes, we use TFS. We use branching systems and everything else. It all gets kind of broken down. We have this thing called main. That's like the big release. I personally, every time we get a release out of main that passes all the sniff tests and everything else, then I go off and I install it. And then I actually do sit down, write some applications, play around with it, try out the features, just make sure it's go. Send information back to the team, kind of like this, don't like that, usual sort of stuff. But the teams themselves are working in a smaller kind of branching system. So it goes down to product units. Maybe you have 100 people working in some kind of a PU branch, and feature branches down below that, maybe teams of 20 to 30. It might be like the C# and VB teams down here, the debugger team over there, TFS over there, that kind of thing, which gives us the ability to kind of spread out the work a little bit. We use all the testing and everything else, and then we do forward and reverse integrates. RIs push the code up through gates with testing, make it all the way back up to main, and then the FIs pull that same code back down. That's how we're able to share the code. So as you can see, a lot of the stuff that we've shipped inside of the product, it's exactly to manage the really, really big, large teams. You may or may not need this level of complexity. This is something we scale to a couple thousand developers, trying to make testers, architects, et cetera, make sure that kind of works. But the same principles kind of apply even at much smaller sort of levels. Now, we also do a whole bunch of performance testing and diagnostic testing and reliability and things like that. This is an example from the last release, and this was in the middle of the release, but we actually take things like the end-to-end scenarios that we want people to do, create a project, create a form, put buttons on it, type code, scrolling, all the rest of those sort of stuff, add that up and say, hey, how long did that actually take? And then go back and compare it and go, well, geez, that's not good enough. All right, this was in the middle of the release. In fact, this is before beta 1 or beta 2, and it's about when I started going, we need to go fix this. So we went back and did a bunch of other work and pulled it back to where it needed to be. But once again, use the profiler tools, the stuff to kind of plug in, go pull all that data back. Finally, dog fooding, also incredibly important to us. I think Eric Gamma actually has the better kind of version of this, which is he's Swiss, so it's drink your own champagne or eat your own chocolate. It's probably a little classier than eating dog food. I'm not quite sure why Americans are obsessed with eating dog food in the software industry, but the concept itself makes a ton of sense, right? We want to be able to use the software before we actually hand it out. And so what we've done internally, we've got, for example, the task board stuff that you saw Cameron show off. The ALM teams are actually already using that. We have basically 2 internal servers. We have one for just the ALM teams that are doing that. They can put newer builds on. And that way, if something goes wrong and it doesn't work quite right, well, then they're taking the pain because it's their code, right? And the rest of the division's on a larger one, and they get mirrored back and forth. And that's an example. But we also use the IDE and the rest of the tools and that kind of stuff as well. And then finally, this is also on the project management side. This scorecard pulls a bunch of data out of the existing systems. It's a custom kind of scorecard. We took the team names off just to protect the innocent. But and what we track along the way kind of varies. You can see here we're actually looking at automation, bugs, bug cap per person. So kind of how is our burn down rate at the end of the milestone going, and how is that feeling? Perf tests, how close to the goals are you? Are you using the product and are you on track? Is a good way to do that. Now, this is later in the cycle, this particular report. The ones we'd have earlier would actually be talking about how are you doing on getting your specs done? How are you doing on your burn down rate? Are you on track with all those sort of things? And you kind of transition through. And the data itself then comes out of the core TFS. And some of the reports and things that we put into SharePoint last release were a result of us doing a lot of this custom data mining and saying, what, we think our customers could use the same stuff. Why make them build it? And so, pulling some of this stuff back out. So some internal stuff, and this is a snapshot when we finished the Visual Studio 2010 project. So this is us using our own stuff. We have 23 million source code files. That's a lot of source code. Some may argue that's too much source code. We were talking about the performance issue. Do you really need 23 million source code files? It's a fair question. It's a fair question. We don't debate that. But yeah, we kick out 2,000 builds per month. You remember that branching structure that we had back there, right? Like every single one of those kicks out multiple builds because we'll build what we call retail, the optimized version and the debug version, times 64-bit and 32-bit, right? And then we also do localization. And so we're fairly typically kicking out a kind of pseudo-loc build. All the resources aren't there, but it's localized, it's world ready. We also probably doing Japanese and German in order to get a combination of languages with different attributes. And by the time we're done, of course, we add all the rest of the languages in too. So it winds up being a lot of builds. We're rocking about 15 terabytes of data in one TFS project collection for that. Anybody else rocking? Who's got a terabyte data? Just me? Okay. Just me. I probably have the biggest TFS installation on the planet. I'm pretty sure about that. The server guys, Windows Server and SQL Server guys, every time we tell them we're doing a new release, like, oh, geez, you're going to port it over to our new stuff, aren't you? Yeah, we're going to go do that. Because imagine, like doing an FI down through that system, that's a million row transaction. 23 million lines of source code, and you come back there and you're updating probably some subset of that. I could wind up, throwing a million rows, down through that. You can imagine that causes all sorts of havoc for the query processor, for the virtual memory, allocator inside of the kernel, a bunch of stuff like that, and geez. But the good news is I'm doing that before you see the software. So by the time you get it, hopefully it's sitting in good shape. So just a little bit of a feeling of us kind of, using some of the stuff on the internal side as well. All right, so with that, again, I don't want to do a ton of slides because it's an unplugged session, it's more interactive, but I wanted to kind of give you a little bit of just a feeling, background, what we're doing, and just some of the behind the scenes sort of stuff. Now, for the unplugged piece of this, now what we typically do for an unplugged, I'm going to pull up Notepad here just to make it nice and simple, and let's make the font size, oh good, it's up to 22 right here. All right, so let me go back over here and for the unplug, anything's fair game. Here's a few areas to kick off some ideas, but I'm happy to answer any question you have, actually. They asked me if I wanted a moderator, said no, so I'm happy to answer anything you come up with. These are areas on my team that I have, but we can go any broader than that if you want. Kind of up to you. Other areas of interest. I love writing code. I love architecture, performance stuff, twizzle in there. I am from Minnesota, so I love ice fishing. Football. Yeah, I'm a big, huge Leo Messi fan, so FC Barcelona fans, yeah, doing good. At least they don't drop the cup under the bus. Kind of cool. Not sure what Real Madrid is doing there, but hey, there you go. So just some ideas for us to kind of go look at. So with that, let me open it up to questions, and I want to spend a few minutes grabbing some questions. What we'll do is we'll grab a bunch of them and kind of put them together so they're kind of grouped, and that way we can kind of hit most of them all at once. We can still make it interactive, so you have follow-ups and stuff like that. Happy to have that conversation as well. And then once we're done, we'll see if there's anything else left. So who's got questions? Yes, sir.
What's the upgrade path or the future path for some of the line of business applications using smart device projects? We have a lot of that, and it's tied to BS 2008 now.
Yes. So Win Mobile. Yep. Okay. Okay. Great. Other questions? Yes, sir.
What's the plan around expression blend functionalities being integrated into the 2010 or into the Visual Studio so that way you have more robust capability around UI design into WPF and stuff like that?
Okay. Excellent. Awesome. Okay. You can never have too much duplicate technology, no? Oh, yeah, maybe not. Yes, ma'am. Then you, sir. Okay, so Windows CE. Yep. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Great. Yes, sir.
Some of the prototyping tools coming out, we now have the expression blend, sketch flow. We've got sort of light switch stuff and stuff you showed with the keynote.
Yep.
Is there some plan to start bringing those together or to have one coherent tool?
Okay. Okay. And consolidation is kind of what I kind of heard is a potential solution or something like that. Okay. Yes, sir.
Down the line of the first one, let's add SQL Server tools for this, things that are missing in 2010.
Yes. Like.
And I assume that PowerPoint is really a sample editor under the scenes, so as you now use PowerPoint, how do you see PowerPoint and SketchFlow?
Yeah. How do the two fit, and what are their roles and that kind of stuff. Okay. Yeah, and I think probably the BI and reporting services are probably the two big ones in the SQL tools. You didn't mention those, but I'm sure that's what I usually hear anyway. Other questions? Yes, sir. Okay. Okay. Yes, sir.
Is there any plans to open up light switch
got it, yep. Light switch to other data sources besides EF. Okay? Yes, ma'am. Ah, excellent question. Okay. Yeah, I kind of heard two things, so the ALM and then maybe a little bit about plans for C++, roadmap kind of thing. Okay. Okay, yep, good. We definitely talked about that. Other questions? Okay, let's go ahead and start on, yes, sir.
Is there a hosted version of TFS?
Hosted version of TFS. Okay, yes. Okay. Anything else? Which scenarios? Disconnected. Oh, disconnected. Disconnected. Okay, got it. Offline. Okay. There's a big one on here I was expecting to see, but haven't seen it yet. Maybe it'll come up later. Okay, good. Let's start off with these right here then. Okay. So we got a bunch about tool support, expression blend. Yeah, okay. Prototyping, sketchflow, these go together. How about we take we'll put these into groups. The language pieces up here, and then our TFS questions right here. And then, like I said, we can do follow-up questions and all that kind of stuff along the way. So do feel free to interrupt me. This is meant to, that's why we're in a small room, just to make it very kind of interactive. Okay, so upgrade path, in general, the first set of questions here are kind of asking about Windows CE, Windows Phone, and kind of the device support, and what does that look like and what are our plans for that. Yeah, it was a tough call in order to take the Windows CE work and leave that in 2008. There was a lot of additional work that went into producing the Windows Phone components on that. So we literally took the team, got them over, and said, I really need you to go after, making this new phone tool work. As you can see, there's a big departure between the two. Now, it's both good and bad, right? I mean, from a good perspective, we came out with this kind of cooler new UI with the tiles and all the rest of that kind of stuff. It's got a nice, .NET programming model. It's got XAML behind it and that kind of stuff. We had, WinForms on Windows CE, so you get some of the vector scaling graphics, the ability to do some gaming, a few things like that. So that's kind of the good part. But it also, of course, means that the team had to move over and go do that. So at this point, I don't have plans to take the CE tooling that we had in 2008. It's not being pulled forward either to vNext. So we don't have that in there. So we're not going to have that. We've got kind of basically the existing tooling for what that looks for. What I can tell you, and I don't actually own the CE components, but we are looking with that team to figure out, well, how do we provide this kind of roadmap? What should this wind up looking like? We do have the new Windows Phone stuff coming out. You saw the new Mango tools and stuff like that that's there. And I suspect we've got at least a group here that I'm hearing are doing a lot of kind of embedded in Windows CE work today. What does that roadmap look like, for that? I think is kind of the core of the question. Yeah, so we're not pulling the tools forward. But what I can do, if you guys want, and anybody can send me a mail, it's Jason Z. Z is in zebra at Microsoft.com. Feel free to send me direct mail. And I'm happy to actually hook you up with the right set of folks, and we'll talk about what the roadmap looks like for that code. We're certainly continuing to support everything that's there, but we're not pulling the tool set forward. Okay? SQL Server tools and BI. This one, what I would tell you is, yeah, I'm with you on that. I mean, especially, it's kind of these two. One thing I would tell you is that in Visual Studio 2008, one of the things that bugged me about it is we didn't actually have our entire ecosystem lined up when we shipped the product. And by that, what I mean is, on the day that the product came out, if you wanted to go get something like ReSharper or something like that, it wasn't ready yet. Right? And in some cases, it took 4 to 6 months or something like that for your favorite components to come. That was some Microsoft stuff, some external partner work, and things like that. So one of the things we did differently for 2010, we actually went back and spent the 2 years before we shipped in lockstep with our partners and worked very, very hard with them on making sure that they had all the access to the bits, to the team. We actually have a lot of partners come out to the Redmond campus in Washington about every 3 to 4 months, somewhere on average in there. And we gave them early bits and all the rest of that kind of stuff. So the good news is when we shipped 2010, we actually had over 50 of the partners available on the same day. And the original list for some of the Microsoft components that were missing, it took us, there's 5 or 6 of those as well. These are the two that are still kind of sticking out there. And the problem I kind of see with this one, and this is going to sound like an excuse, I guess it kind of is in some ways, but a lot of times people look at Microsoft and they see this really big battleship streaming down the ocean. It's actually more like 1,000 kayaks kind of swimming around next to each other. That's actually how the company winds up working. We got all these little teams. We're all kind of working on little bits of technology and that kind of stuff, and kind of pulling it together and getting it coordinated. We want to make sure we do that, and sometimes we don't always do that as well as we should. Nonetheless, I really do. We have to do that, right? Because I don't think you guys really care what building I'm in, what building the CLR or the SQL team is in, how many roads there are, and how many stop signs between the two of us. Kind of irrelevant, right? I mean, either it works for your customers, or it doesn't. So that's kind of a problem. Now, the news on these is these are coming. They're part of the Denali release. I'm sure you've seen maybe Quentin's talk or anything like that. So we are getting the updated support. And as the two teams, we've actually spent some time saying, how do we not have this disconnect, right? Because this is a real problem. Because you're probably in a mode where you're still got 2008. You're running that one side by side with 2010. And you can't quite mix the projects because you don't have the right project type in there. So that is coming. That is getting fixed. And going forward, I'm expecting us as teams, the two businesses, to do a better job coordinating on this stuff. So sorry it's taking so long.
Will it work in 2010 then, or will it work?
Yes, it'll work in 2010. Yeah, because my ultimate goal is for you to be able to just move over to 2010 and not have that problem, right? And then the next goal, you saw me announce vNext, on Monday. When that one comes out, I want the same thing. And what I'm saying is, yes, we'll get it for 2010. That eliminates the immediate problem. So you can just everybody get over to 2010 and be able to start doing it. That's a combination of the next SQL release, the codename Denali. Hopefully you've seen the announcements on that kind of stuff. That'll have the right support and work with 2010. And then when we get to vNext, I'm expecting not to have the synchronization problem again, because I recognize what a pain in the butt it is. So on behalf of both of us, I'm sorry. It's not good. Yes, sir.
Right now, we struggle with, we have an SSR server at 2005, we got 2008, and I got to go back to 2005 in order to work on that project. You're saying in 2010 that we'll be able to consolidate all that, or will that never happen?
No, you should. Well, there's kind of two pieces in here. We're having break time out here. There's kind of a couple of pieces in here. One is, we will always put the newest designers and the newest set of the tools and things like that. So that'll be in there. Now, the question you're asking is more around project compatibility and kind of down-level targeting. Yeah, in this case, it's the targeting thing. So we do a certain amount. I honestly don't know exactly how far back for the version numbers we'll have. I know we'll have the Denali one. If you send me a mail, I can give you the precise one. We do multi-targeting many other places. So, for example, the 2010 product can support all the way down to CLR version 2, right? So that's kind of a multi-targeting sort of aspect. And the other one I'll mention, I think it's actually getting shown tomorrow, but we also are doing some project compatibility work as well, so that as you start working on new ones, we upgrade file formats. That causes it to be hard to open files in one version and keep them in the other. So we're working on that problem too, which I think a lot of people are pretty excited to see us do. Yes, sir.
Well, a question and comment. My understanding is that, just to clarify, when it rolls out with Denali, it's only supporting Denali, not 2008 R2, even though 2008 R2 was released after Visual Studio.
I believe we've got the tools for the 2008 R2 stuff also.
I've heard rather explicitly, but
You haven't?
it's not. So I could be off on that, but
Yeah.
you've asked that question directly and been told.
Yeah, they're skipping over and they don't have the multi-target. Okay.
The impact to us is cascades through everything that you're trying to tell us to do. So
Yeah.
if I want to use TFS 2010 and use the testing facilities and things like that and drive it back on a section of my code base has to remain in 2008, that's
Yeah.
problematic.
Yeah, you got a version.
Overall connected model that you have and saying, well, it's not like it's a core thing, say SQL Server, that we're not bringing up to date.
Yeah.
It really winds up leaving us feel pretty left behind.
Yeah.
Because I can't just suddenly say, oh, look, it's December and Denali's out, and I can take all of my customers that are on my product and say, sorry, tomorrow you have to upgrade.
Yeah, we got to upgrade. Yeah, it takes a while to do the upgrades. Yep. Yeah. Okay. So we'll double check on it and just make sure we get the right versions on it. I do want to pull them forward, make sure we get the compatibility. I hear you on the upgrade issue because I wish it was as easy as just tossing people on a new version, but we clearly know that it isn't. Maybe in the services world we'll have even more, but yeah. So, okay, great. All right, expression blend. Yeah, tons of, as far as I know, PowerPoint is not yet on XAML. I think we've actually done mock-up kind of versions as testing, so we'll see how that one works. But yeah, so we've got a bunch of great new functionality in both, and so we of course keep the project compatibility and all the rest of that kind of stuff. I don't really have anything to announce with respect to pulling these things totally in gear, but I will tell you it is something we are looking at, because having there's some nice features in both of them, right? I mean the coding version inside of Visual Studio is very, very familiar if you're used to the metaphors in VS, the drag and drop and the property, that kind of stuff. If you're a designer, then the design surface area and expression blend is very familiar to you as well. And there's some really cool kind of features actually in both. And so it would be great if we could figure out a way for those two to get more in sync with each other. And that way we kind of have one core to invest in, one core of experiences, and just make sure that it's kind of consistent and stuff like that. And so it's something that we're looking at to see if we can figure out a good way to kind of leverage those things and get a consistent sort of experience. I think it's good feedback that it sounds like that would be useful to people if we were to do that.
A lot of the development sites now start with these low-fidelity sketch flow-like mock-ups.
Yes.
And they're done in a very difficult-to-use tool for developers.
Yep.
And it's very disconnected. Expression doesn't even really do TFS or source code management well.
Right.
So, and then PowerPoint, I think it's a great presentation style to be able to split through easier than trying to do things in SketchFlow. But then you miss that sketchy design. This is not a working, functioning thing.
Yep.
Very sketchy.
Yeah. Well, that was kind of the second point, like how do all these things relate? And I actually see them as complementary, right? So for example, I think that what we said, because we're working very closely with the expression team, right? They know exactly what we're doing. We're talking about ways we can interop and that kind of thing. The storyboarding thing that we're trying to do with PowerPoint is, to me, kind of the electronic version of your paper mock-ups, right? I mean, where's the flow? Like when we do designs, we have these big wall-long, kind of printouts of the mock-ups, and you can kind of watch and look what the flow looks like. And, the storyboarding in PowerPoint is actually really great for that. Right? And you saw how easy it was. I mean, we all use PowerPoint. You're used to it. It's really easy to grab, drag and drop the controls, kind of see what it would look like, and it's of reasonable fidelity as well. You can look at it and go, yeah, okay, I kind of see what this should be. And then, like I mentioned, because it's PowerPoint, I can put URLs in there, and it turns out I can use the hyperlinking feature of PowerPoint, so that ways you're looking at the PowerPoint, you can just click it, and it simulates a mouse button. I can show animations. I can even show touch, with animations, the movement animations and pictures. I can show touch and phone, and for those sort of devices, it's pretty cool for that. Very fast, not designed to give the developer a leg up. More designed to say, does this make sense? Do you as a user, is this the flow? Is this what you were thinking about? Is this what you wanted me to go build? Because if we're on the same page, I'm now going to go off to the next step. And this is where you can then move up into SketchFlow. And SketchFlow is a true prototyping tool, right? Like you're really using XAML, you're really producing code assets. You may not be typing code underneath, but the designer is actually wiring it all together, right? And it's giving you the wireframe and everything else and giving you the nice kind of diagram, but it's actually giving you the XAML assets, right? And they're not styled, they're styled intentionally so you don't think that it's just kind of done. We found for a lot of people that use SketchFlow, if it was too high fidelity, the customer would just say, oh, good, you're going to ship this next week, right? It's like, no. I'm just trying to show you what it's going to look like. I'm not done yet. It's going to take a little while. So that's kind of the delta between the two of them. So I think that is a reasonable kind of spectrum between them. We are looking at that, yes. We're looking kind of at the both ways of it. How can we get these two things to kind of work? So if you are doing the formal prototyping for the customer, you can kind of get the benefits of both. Right? And I think your needs are probably going to change depending upon what you're trying to do in your group. I know some people, depending upon the complexity of the app, like the one that Cameron and I showed is actually pretty straightforward. Like I think going through and doing all of SketchFlow to prototype that, unnecessary for the simple field that he's adding. That would be enough to say, yeah, this is what I want to go do. Someone could go right into the implementation and feel confident. But if you're doing a greenfield application and it's got many more screens that are new and interactions, the prototyping thing probably makes a lot of sense because then you can actually play with it. Your assets are further along. So from that perspective, I think they're complementary. We are working on ways to make them kind of work together. Now, LightSwitch itself is actually different in this case. So LightSwitch, how many people have seen LightSwitch? Awesome. That's fantastic. Yeah, so light switch, we basically, we are really just going and shooting for the kind of forms over data business application. What's the fastest way to go build, one of these things? And what we were finding is that we have, cases where I've met with CIOs that are managing 10,000 applications for their enterprise. 10,000. I'm like, 10,000? How do you get to 10,000? I'm surprised. Their app, they have to manage all these things, right? But you want to guess where they came from? Access, VB6, definitely. The Fox Pro. Lots and lots and lots of Excel. Yeah, Excel is in there too, right? I mean, so to them, an application was simply anything that a lot of users were using, that they had to deploy group policy, manage it, do app virtualization, kind of keep it all going. And so we were looking at that going, wow, okay, that is a lot of applications, right? Now, oftentimes, when we think of enterprise, we're thinking tier one, kind of our bigger applications, more formally spec'd and run, they're, supporting 10,000 people, or from a customer perspective, maybe millions and millions of people, that sort of thing. But there's a bunch of these apps that just make the world go. And so that's what we were trying to set out to go do, because, when we created .NET, we got a lot of consolidation, we built in some robustness, but, frankly, we did lose some of this kind of easy to use, kind of rapid building of application stuff. And that's the goal for light switch. Now, it is interesting in that, mentioning in prototyping, I see the, where it's in the neighborhood in so much as it's so easy to go build the application that you could imagine being able to, build one up and show it also as another type of prototype. So definitely, and I imagine we will have some people doing that. The big thing, though, is our core target is we really want real applications that people are going to build. And again, the thesis here, it's built on top of the same stuff that you would write, uses 3-tier architecture, it's ASP.NET at the back end, it's .NET on the client and on the server, so your business logic goes on both. We're just trying to make that super easy, and that way, when you turn it into, the next level app, and maybe you decide to go add more and more departments on top of it, no worries, we'll be able to come back and add those folks onto the list. We'll be able to go off and go expand it. They can open it in Pro and do that. So I can imagine some people doing some prototyping, but we didn't really design it per se for that purpose. It really is meant to be production. And Beta 2 is now go live. So I've actually got people that have already deployed applications on top of Light Switch, which is pretty cool. Yes, sir.
The goal of Light Switch is to replace the Excel and Access databases?
Let me put it this way. I think there is definitely a role for Access and Excel. So, I would not say we're trying to replace those, because there is still going to be cases where you're going to have people. I mean, Excel is a really fantastic tool.
Macros and these apps that, we have the same problem.
Yeah.
Access databases and macros are all over the place, and we want to get rid of them.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you're hitting on the core part. I still believe people are going to use Access, they're going to use Excel, and they should. Right? I mean, what you're pointing out the key thing, which is when you get to the point where you're really getting in to write a lot of code and a lot of business logic, and you're starting to get into that kind of mode, you really are doing development, right? And that really is the differentiator here, right? So we actually look at Light Switch as a companion, to the Office suite. In fact, we've integrated very cleanly with it. You can do the exports into Excel, use Mail and Word and, SharePoint and all the rest of that kind of stuff. But yeah, it's more of a companion. But you're absolutely right. When you get into the point where you want to do a bunch of code, now you're really getting to the core of what we want Light Switch to be able to do. So rapid screens, wrap it on top of data, make it simple. Then you get into code, and you're dropping it into Visual Studio. So you can use all the same stuff you've got. You can go grab your own code snippets and pull them together. But it's going to be .NET. It's going to be robust. Robust is the code you copy, but or write yourself. But it's you have the ability to make it there and maintainable and all the rest of that. So a couple, yeah, yes sir, right there. And then, yeah, no, it's an excellent question. Let me recap, just make sure the folks in the front also heard. But the observation is you got Light Switch, but you also have dynamic data. You got Web Matrix. How many of these solutions do you need? And how do I kind of pick what works where? Some of these things have kind of evolved to come up here. I do think there are different scenarios for this. A lot of the dynamic data works in this context of ASP.NET, and you still put some additional code around it. What we're trying to do here is make sure that we can do the easy data designer and the kind of screen design that comes with that in your classic line of business application. The dynamic data features out of ASP.NET, those were designed to kind of pull back a lot of the same kind of scaffolding sort of literally that, but the ability to kind of read off of the schema and do the dynamic, and it's kind of based on that web sort of protocol. And I've seen people that want to use both. Web Matrix is actually fairly new. We've actually been working on LightSwitch for about 3 years in the making. And Web Matrix itself, to me, the primary audience for that one, it's not necessarily again the pro coder. It's oftentimes the folks that are really about building web applications for a living, where it's a lot more around, hey, I need to be able to turn these apps out quickly. Oftentimes it's consultant folks that are working on behalf of smaller companies. I need to go do the pet store over here, and that kind of stuff. And it's also designed to be approachable, but that's also why it has the app gallery for things like WordPress deploy and Drupal and Joomla and a bunch of those things as well. Because in that business, a lot of time in your consulting business, what you're doing is rapidly installing those type of applications, doing the customization, get in, get out. And that's why Web Matrix, for example, all the features, the Razor syntax, all the rest of that kind of stuff, works directly inside of Visual Studio as well, because it's not like it's mutually exclusive. I mean, once I get those features in, I'd like to have it. So some of the techniques, I'd say you're seeing the techniques in there being used in both places. We think they're for different audiences at the end of the day, and how you download it and the pattern in which you go use it. I'd love to see a lot of the simplicity that we've introduced in some of these tools show up in other places as well. For example, like one of my favorite features out of LightSwitch is the referential integrity thing. You guys have seen that? You add a reference between something. How nice is it? It just says like customer, will have multiple orders. Yes, thank you. I mean, I worked on like 3 SQL engines, like actually the parsers and the language integration and that kind of stuff. And like after a while, the SQL syntax just gets to be like, holy cow, guys, you know what I mean? So it's nice to be able to drag, drop, set a couple of things, and it just says in English, this has a that, or multiple of those, what I mean? So that kind of approach of simplicity, I think we should, pull that back into other places as well and use the approach. So again, I think there's an audience sort of thing, depending upon what you're looking for, and providing some level of comfort in there, I think is actually a good. Right? I mean, because some people, especially I've met one individual, just one little short story, an individual who's using, Fox Pro. I've actually met a few people like this, and in some cases, what's helpful is, you pull up Visual Studio. If you're not used to it, it is a big environment, right? You know how many commands we have in there? Care to hazard a guess? 4,000 was it? How many? 65,000? A little high. Not as high as you want, though. It's about 40. There's about 40,000 sort of different command points. That includes all of like the sub-commands, because it's a programming surface area too, right? I mean, the IDE is built on top of an API, which you can actually write code against it. You know what I'm saying? So it's huge. That's why we added this quick search thing in the Power Tools. You can hit Control F3, and when it pops it up, you can type debug, and it gives you all the debug commands. There's like 12 right there alone. Like erase my breakpoints, add some breakpoints, and start debugging, stop debugging, skip over debugging, start without debugging. That kind of stuff. So again, it is a complicated environment, and sometimes getting into even a language like .NET in the framework, it's very large. And so having some of these tools and entry points, I think will make it much more approachable to people, so they can get going and they can kind of build up their skill sets if that's where they're at. If you're already a very experienced, VS Pro kind of programmer, VB and C#, and you're building line of business applications, you probably will still just stay right in Pro. You may find for some of your projects, pulling up LightSwitch gives you a faster way to do it. But if you're doing a mission critical app for your entire enterprise, 10,000 users, you're probably going to continue to just use Pro in that big kind of base that you have. So, I think having some choice in here is actually pretty valuable. The next question was also about LightSwitch, and that's the other data sources that we're planning on providing besides Entity Framework. The truth is we actually provide the ability to do consumption for web services today. And so you can, for anything that gets exposed, you can actually pull it in and add the service reference to it. Now, in this case, Entity Framework is kind of the native part for the database piece, but you've seen the same approach being used for SharePoint. right? So what we did is we actually did add a consumption API for SharePoint. You can program against it. We use like the OData feed for that. You can pull all the data in, and we actually filter out a bunch of the fields, because you've seen a SharePoint schema for the data they pull back? I got 40,000 commands, they got 300 fields. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that's coming back that you don't quite need. I'm sure it's needed for the kind of content database and that kind of stuff, but you don't want it up on the front end. And so one of the things we'll be doing going forward is we want to make it much, much easier for you in future versions to be able to get even better consumption to make it easier. But you can actually do it. It's just you have to go through I need to address it as a service and put a service around it, then I can go pull it in. Gives you that extra step. I think if we were to add some additional kind of consumption APIs on that, then that would make it a lot easier for you to go pull in exactly what you're looking for. So we'll have more of that. How many people are using LightSwitch? I asked how many people had seen it. Anybody using it yet? You got one person out there. How's it going? Eh? Yes. Gotcha. All right, so getting the access on the data points and making sure that works well would help a lot. Okay, got it. All right, so there's a question on F# and kind of language, where are we going with direction of F#? So yeah, we're making new stuff on F# and adding new features in there. A lot of stuff around data consumption in particular. Don Syme, who's a MSR Cambridge researcher, and actually works very, very closely with my team. Don's one of the guys that helped design generics for the CLR. He's also the designer of F# and wrote all the original implementation. And so we're making a bunch of functionality and building that forward. It's a great language for doing especially some of the mathematically oriented stuff, some of the compute-oriented things. I spent a bunch of time talking with folks that do kind of financial analysis, kind of statistical modeling, those sort of things. It's a very discrete language for that. And if you're doing any kind of mapping of math into code, it's a great way to go be able to use that functionality. If you combine that with some of our HPC, kind of cluster work that we've got for being able to do high-performance computing, in addition to all the kind of math libraries and all the rest of that kind of stuff, gives you a good combination. So we're definitely full steam ahead. It ships in the box. Very excited to have it. Yes, sir. Well, yes, I do believe the question is around, hey, can I take advantage of libraries that are using the GPU, algorithms that wind up using that? I think the answer is yes, we have to do that, right? I mean, because if you look at the amount of compute performance you can get out of, especially the kind of what we typically call embarrassingly parallel algorithms, right, where I can actually go streamline, the GPU can just do orders of magnitude better performance than what the CPU can do. It doesn't happen on all of them, but a lot of those algorithms actually work incredibly well. And so, we already have the ability to kind of go pipeline things through on some of those, but I think you're talking more about the composability of multiple of them across. Yeah, so I think we had to go on that work. A bunch of the work that we started doing down this path started with 2010. So all of the task stealing parallelism work, the TPL and both the managed and the unmanaged version of that, being able to program against that parallel link, on the management side, and then the other on the unmanaged side, being able to use it with C++. And so you saw us more doing some of the task stealing, scheduling, kind of threading sort of stuff. Now, I think the GPU stuff, that is something we definitely have been looking at, are making progress on, because you need to be able to run those sort of workloads going forward. So yes, I think you should expect to see us be making big investments in that. So keep coming to conferences. We'll have good toys for you. There's questions about C++. C++, honestly, all I can say to start off with is I'm sorry, because honestly, because the way I've written orders of magnitude more lines of code in C++ as a developer than I have in any other language, frankly, because I've written databases and the CLR and a bunch of other things like that and did it in C++. And there's a period in there where we were kind of doing all sorts of different things with C++ except for kind of evolving. Now the good news is we absolutely recognize that and have been doing a ton of stuff actually starting with 2010. We got a new front end in there, new kind of IntelliSense to get after it and start doing better work on that for scaling. We're working on code generation, code quality, make sure that part's working very well. So we're doing a ton of additional work. There's a session here actually yesterday, I believe, by Terry Leeper from the C++ team, Leeper, which I think is probably the highest scored right now. It's #1 as far as I know. Got 5.0. I think something like that. So if you're interested in C++, Terry's session talks all about the new stuff that we're doing, not only in 2010 that's already there, but some new stuff after that, including ALM. So another good example that we have for C++ now coming forward is we've got unit testing framework. That's included. So if you saw Cameron's session showing how we can do pluggable unit tests and make that all part of your continuous integration, continuous coding, and that kind of stuff, that particular framework, we do have one available for C++. You can use a native framework to test native code and go do all that stuff, and it plugs right into vNext, and all the unit testing stuff that was there is going to work just great. So you can now start plugging it in, doing continuous integration. And there's a bunch of these, kind of modern development techniques that I would have loved to have had as a C++ programmer, so we want to make sure that those are there. So we absolutely believe in C++. It's a fantastic language. There's a ton of code written in it, and we are investing heavily in it. We have an entire team, and actually one of my peers, Mohsen Egson, he's a technical fellow, and he runs the C++ team. A technical fellow is basically like the highest level. Anders Heilsberg is a technical fellow. You probably know Anders. Brian Harry's a technical fellow. Mohsen's a technical fellow. These are like our highest technical level of folks in the company. And so he's a big, huge C++ guy, and he's been doing just a ton of stuff with the team and all the rest of that kind of stuff. So expect good things. Demand good things. We owe you good things. So you need to get that. Okay? So Terry's session, I think, would be really cool if you want to take a look at that one. All right, so that's the C++ sort of work. Hosted version of TFS, yes, we have it. We showed it off at PDC a year ago. Was it a year ago? Whatever the last PDC was, PDC 10, and it's Brian Harry's team has got that one built. We actually took TFS and we took all the code and ported it over to Azure, Platform as a Service. And so all the SQL pieces moved to SQL Azure, the blob storage moved to blob storage. We've got worker roles, web roles, all the rest of that kind of stuff. And we've got a version of that that's kind of up and running. Where we're at in the development cycle for this, we've demonstrated it, so you can go see it. And we've got it in private preview right now. So I've got it. Freaking awesome. I've got my ID in there. It's mostly internal to Microsoft right now. This is that dog fooding kind of that we want to start off, make sure that we're all using it. If it screws up my projects, well, then that's my fault. I don't want to do that to your projects until I finish, mangling mine. Let's not mangle yours, right? That's kind of the intent. But yeah, it's awesome. If you install TFS today, we did TFS Basic in 2010. Only takes about 20 minutes to install that. That's awesome. It takes 20 seconds to create a project collection in Hosted. 20 seconds. So you literally just walk up to the site, say, hey, I'd like to go create a project. Okay, 20 seconds later, here's your project. Thank you. Right? And you just copy the HTTP address, go back into Visual Studio, paste it into the connect to TFS dialog, right? And it does, the only real change we made to the client was this federated, security join. So you can log in with a Google ID, a live ID, take your pick. It remembers that, and then after that, source control, work items, builds, everything just kind of hooks up and goes. And so that's basically where we're sitting with the current version. We will, at some point here, open it up to public preview. And what you should probably expect us to do is to open it up to some additional threshold of people. Again, what we want to do is make sure that the service is running, it's very accurate, working very well, people are excited about it, take the feedback on it. After that works, then we'll go up to the next level, and we'll just kind of keep growing it up until we're at a point where we're ready to just say, anybody can go ahead and jump on board. What you again, expect us to do a lot of work around services for developers, and I think this is a great start because this gets us source control, work items, the ability to do builds. But all when you look at the agile task planning and stuff we've got there, we're going to bring that on board. You can see a number of things. Wouldn't it be cool if you could just go connect to it? You know what I'm saying? And you don't have to worry about provisioning machines and the rest of that kind of junk. I mean, it'd be nice if it was more like self-service. You can just go after it and not have to go do that. So that is our plan. Yes, sir. The question is it full functionality? The version that we've demonstrated so far has source control, has work items, and it's got the ability to do builds. And what I mean by that, to be very specific, you can use a VM in order to run our build process. We don't yet have a build as a service. That's an obvious one that we need to go fill in the blank for. But you can actually have your VM back on your own site as well, which some people would like because they actually would like to see the builds and the binaries that get produced stay behind the firewall. We have the ability to do that. Or you can use an Azure VM and then launch the build right there. So that'll be what the first version is. I think that gets you all the basics. Now, from a roadmap perspective, that's really a timing thing. Right, that's not a statement of, we think the cloud is only good for those three things. It's I want to get the service infrastructure and everything up and running. And I think those are the core three things that everybody, if you're doing a continuous integration, that picture I showed before, those are the min bar that you need to get that kind of environment going in a clean kind of way. And so that's where we're starting, but you should expect to see more coming out of it. And then once we ship it as a service, service to the software, you basically wind up shipping a lot more frequently, right? Because you're operating that. You've seen with Azure, we've shipped a bunch along the way, so expect to see that. Yes, sir.
So what we're missing is the SharePoint reporting.
Yeah, the reporting and the SharePoint, and yeah. I mean, those are examples of things that we won't have on the first day that we open it up. But there is Office 365. We have hosted SharePoint. There's a bunch of different technologies that's available for us. So again, what you're catching us mostly is a point in time sort of space. So I think for some people it'll be perfect. If you've already got on, to be clear, we are not stopping, production or development on-prem at all, right? We're not doing that at all. What I really want is to be able to give you the choice so you can have on-premise. If you've already got your own set up and you're happy with it, you're good to go. There's nothing else you need to do. But I do find that for other folks that don't have it yet, they'd love to be able to just go hit the website, provision, and start using it. And for them, the requirements are kind of there. They'd love to grow up into the other features, maybe adopt those when they're ready. And I think we will have that. Sorry, this keeps going out. Yeah. Well, you only have to use as much as you want. Yes, sir. Yes, will we support Windows Forms and how long? Yes, absolutely. And we've got a tremendous amount of code out there that's written in Windows Forms. I suspect I would probably, how many people using Windows Forms? There's a bunch of us, huh? I got a bunch of stuff in there too. Yeah, probably about 3/4 of us in the room. Yeah, I mean, Windows Forms is we're absolutely going to continue supporting Windows Forms, right? I mean, it's important. There's a lot of existing code that's out there in there. There's new code being written all the time. We have to be able to go in and go do that. I think one of the differences that we have, and why do we have a couple of display technologies? That's the next kind of question. If I look at the kind of touch metaphors, the hardware and that sort of stuff that we've got coming with new device form factors, the recognition is we need to have a kind of interface, a way of programming against these things that works well in that kind of highly graphic, sort of interface, kind of declarative sort of model. That was the genesis of having XAML. I can certainly use the GDI and user stack in order to go produce those. Office clearly has done that in the past. I don't find it incredibly approachable for folks. I mean, I've done some of that programming too. I think if you can get into a more declarative kind of mode for that, it makes building some of these new interfaces like for the phone a little bit easier. So it's great for some models, not great for others. That's why we kind of have a couple of them. But that said, yeah, Windows Forms absolutely going to continue supporting it, like period. Right? Don't want to walk away from it. Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so just to recap, the observation is, hey, with Light Switch, you're using XAML in order to go do the forms that I see on the screen, but you're not making those directly accessible to me as a developer, or do you have plans to go do that? Is that approximately right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Now, part of this does come down to the core of the design for Light Switch, right? So one of the observations of how do we make this simple, right? Well, part of it is trying to expose a ton of kind of, complicated plumbing. So that's one of the trade-offs you get. Now, but we did make it extensible. So for example, when you have a Light Switch form, you can actually go in and add your own custom XAML to it. That actually is supported. Now, you do it in Visual Studio Pro, because again, we wanted the tool itself to be approachable. We don't want it to become overwhelming. And if you start again exposing all the knobs and dials and windows and 30,000 commands, it gets a little bit that way. But you can actually create a light switch extension project in Visual Studio Pro. And in fact, a lot of our partners are now looking at doing exactly that. And that's where you get, for example, the new business types that are added, the new kind of skins that you can put on top of it. Those are written as extensions. And so you can actually do that piece there. Now, if the problem with these sort of things is at the bottom, we're trying to basically run this off of a model. The model's got the data, it's got attributes around the data like, referential integrity and that sort of stuff, and it also has some of the connection and other sort of points in there. So if we wind up going in and letting you, kind of muck with that, then you get into this point where it's harder to maybe project across the rest of them. So that's the trade-off we made. We'd like to keep it a little bit more close at the front. The way you do the extensions is by by doing these kind of light switch extensions in Pro, because when you do those, then there's a fully documented way in order to go write the extensions that we know will scale with the rest of the app. And that way, if I go back and add a number of cool features for like light switch vNext, after the one that I'm currently working on shipping, then if I go off and change it and say, you know what, I need to change the way the XAML is emitted and how it works to give you these other new features, if you've done a lot of customization on it, that'll probably break. And so that's why we tried to formalize the extension points. Okay? And then offline scenarios. We are doing some work around making offline easier. Some of this is around the kind of local files, status on the timings for the files and which version's in there. Oftentimes, what you're doing is you're trying to make sure that I can just kind of like, I'm offline, I'm on a plane, I want to kind of do that sort of work. And we want to be able to make that a lot simpler for you. And so, yes, we are actually looking at some of those sort of features. There's a set of folks that things like that people were working for TFS. And yeah, we've heard that feedback a lot. And so we're looking at what new things we can add in on top of that as well. Well, you can do that as well today, but without the bridge. Like I've actually got TFS installed on this laptop. But here what I'm talking about more is getting smarter about, when I'm in the project file and I want to basically do offline work, and then I go back and hook it back up and doing the synchronization points and making sure that that works, kind of efficiently, because with the offline cache and some of those stuff, sometimes you get a little bit out of sync, and I know it can become confusing sometimes for how that works. So we're trying to make some of that stuff a lot simpler, because we're finding that is a pretty typical scenario. And so that's something that Brian and the team are actually working on and going after. Okay? We've also looked at, the question is about, distributed source code, DVCS, kind of functionality and stuff like that. We are not yet trying to do a full, distributed, version control system. Again, a lot of what we find is what people are doing is more this kind of offline scenario is what they're really interested in accomplishing. So if we can kind of get some of the tension or the friction out of there, I think that solves a bunch of that problem. Now, will we do a DVCS? It's not currently in our plans. But we're always figuring out what we need to do next. But for right now, it's not in our plans. We're doing a lot more of the hosted stuff. I mean, it certainly helps you with a similar kind of problem. And so then the question is, did you want the entire distributed, solution, or is your real issue kind of the pain around the offline piece? And where we're currently landing right now is let's fix the offline, let's get the hosted stuff going, let's enable all that sort of functionality. And then to the extent that we come along later and say, what, distributed is something we'd like to do, then we would look at that. But it's not currently in the plans, just to set expectations correctly. Yes, ma'am. So you don't have TFS, but you want to use which features? Yes. So the question is, hey, I like your testing tools. Those seem pretty cool, like your automated playback and all that kind of stuff. But I'm not using TFS. Yeah, I mean, the problem we run into is that a lot of the way that the testing tools work and the flow that goes through the tools themselves, it needs to have the backing store behind it. And so we have built it with the decision that we're going to make it, work directly on top of TFS. Now, what you can do, because I mean, for like creating test plans, for example, those get stored in there, and then when you run the builds, then the tests get automatically run. When I go back and get the repros for the developers, I mean, that whole collaboration system is enabled through TFS. Now, you can, move at your own speed with respect to adoption. So, for example, if you're already using an existing source control system and it's just, it's not the right time for you to be able to go make the move, then what you could do is is get a TFS database that your test team would wind up using. Just store your test plans and test cases in there, and you can actually go in and use the automation against it. For example, we have an Eclipse plugin for Java developers, for example, Team Explorer Everywhere. So if you've got Java folks on your team, they're actually probably using Maven, and a bunch of other stuff for their Java builds. But you can use our plugin for Eclipse to do source control and work items and everything else. And now I can use Maven scripts and other sort of things like that in order to go plug in and use other parts of the technology. You can pull them out and go use it. So if that's kind of similar to your case, whether it's Java or not, but if it's similar, then you can actually just use TFS for that. But again, we think the real kind of power is unlocked once you get everything into the database and it's all kind of interconnected and working together. Yeah. No, you can't just go, and we don't expect you to just come along and say, hey, let's forget about what we've been doing for 20 years. It's DFS, baby. Let's go. I burn all the projects, file new projects. I love file new projects. Yes, no, I certainly don't expect that that'll be the case. I'm totally with you. Now, one of the things we did do because of that, we made TFS and the core points, we made them extensible, completely extensible. And we have SDKs for that. In fact, Brian blogged about even a Java SDK that we released on Monday, again, for the Eclipse programmers if they need to do that. That's designed so that you can go in and start adopting the pieces you want. Same thing's true of the Agile pieces that we showed too. Like, if you're not ready to jump completely into Agile, because we've got a good solution for all of it, we think, and we doubled down on the VNext, you can just pick out the parts you want. Like, you could just come in and say, well, I'm just going to use the task board stuff, and I'm just going to use that for Scrum and stand-ups, and I'm not using anything else, right? You can certainly go do that and kind of pick off the pieces and kind of grow with that. The final thing is the extensibility stuff. We do actually have an adapter kit that's available. It's open source, or it's at least free for download, and it actually contains the components required for programming and using TFS and the data behind it. So if you've got heterogeneous kind of systems, you can use that, if it's custom, to be able to kind of bridge and move data back and forth. That's that same toolkit I mentioned internally that we're bridging from the kind of ALM internal server for the guys with the newer versions of the builds and the rest of the division. We're using that same toolkit to actually mirror the data back and forth. It gives me a way to do that. So there's a little bit of wiring and grab your wrench and your screwdriver and hammer, but all the code and everything is there, and the default kits do some of the basic stuff that you'd want to go do. So it is possible to stitch it all together. Cool. Yes, sir.
Just out of curiosity, what was the reason behind the decision to make Expression Blend? I guess the entire Expression Studio separate from Visual Studio. It seems like the philosophy is to pull all of the team members into Visual Studio now. Just wondering why the designer didn't get included.
As the owner of Visual Studio, I agree with you. No. But, my peer in Expression may not. No, the main reason for having the two is we actually do feel like there are a couple of audiences. And so this goes back to the kind of one of those core principles that I mentioned up there, like the right tool for the right job. In this case, if you're a designer, Visual Studio is a horrifying experience. Like, whoa, what the hell is this? Code? What's a debug? Huh? Really? You know what I mean? I mean, that may or may not be true for someone who's a project manager too. Like, I don't want to go into Visual Studio in order to see which tasks are completed. That's why we did, for example, the SharePoint, the reporting piece. We got the web front end, so you can kind of go grab that. We did project server integration as well. I don't know if people saw that, but like if you're managing big portfolios, you can pull in project server. You can manage a portfolio of projects, and that bridges into TFS. You can go do that. The meta point is we want the right tool for the right job, and then you should feel comfortable in that. But again, if it's all going through the same database, we still get to collaborate. And so from the expression perspective, the question is when you have a graphics artist, a true designer. I'm not a designer. Just for full clarity, I'm an engine guy. What I did in the CLR is the file formats, the bootstrapping code. I was a debugger, dev lead, the profiler dev lead. Like when I do UI, it's command line and stick figures. That's it's about as good as I can do. It's not getting any better than that. You know what I mean? So like when you have professionals that really know how to design stuff, if you ever get a chance to watch Christian Shorman from the Expression team, Christian's one of the senior engineers and leads for Expression. Phenomenally good, man. Wow. I can run the debugger the way he runs the Expression stuff. You know what I'm saying? Like I can go pick context out and dump context natively and blah, blah, blah. And he's like whipping sizes and turning into ellipse with gradients of things. And it's like, wow, I don't even know what you just did right there. So anyway, so that's, so there really are different audiences in there. And I think that's one of our kind of core premises. Find the right tool, let it match what you're trying to do for your job, what your experience level looks like, and let's make that work really well. Yes, ma'am.
Where does SharePoint fit into this? Because we're kind of struggling, what do we do .NET, what do we do SharePoint? We're just struggling
Mm-hmm.
how to make these choices.
Yeah, from a platform perspective, where does SharePoint kind of fit in? Yeah, and so the way we look at it, SharePoint, incredibly popular, gives me this nice, content management system, integrates well with all the Office clients. If you're looking at rolling out Office 365, SharePoint's a core part of that solution as well. It's kind of a backbone thing for storage and everything else. And so that's one of the reasons why we spent all the additional time investing in SharePoint tooling for Visual Studio 2010. Right? I mean, so if you use 2010, then if you want to create custom, web forms, essentially, is a way to think about it. I want to do customization. I want to program against the data in SharePoint. I want to put UI up, do workflows, kick them off, and stuff like that. And I want to do that level of programming. Then the Visual Studio 2010 definitely is the right tool for that. So if you haven't seen the content in there, I definitely recommend it. You can use .NET, use Visual Basic, use C#, for example, take your pick, doesn't matter, and do the file new project. You can connect to your existing SharePoint. You can create lists, you can consume lists, you can kick off workflows, you can essentially write your business logic. And so if you want to use SharePoint as kind of your true front end for your enterprise and the custom applications, we make that super simple. And the other big thing that we did in there, it's not that you couldn't write custom SharePoint parts before 2010. You absolutely could. There was a lot of GUIDs. GUIDs are painful. Having been a COM developer since 91, GUIDs are painful. I like them. They serve a good usage. I don't want to see them. I want them behind the scenes. I don't care what a GUID is, but there was a lot of those sort of things. And it literally took like 28 steps in order to go do the deploy and get to debug. We replaced that with F5. Now there's still some steps behind there, but with the new version of SharePoint, we actually got them to take out some of the steps. And then for the other pieces, we went in and wrote code on top of it and said, great, we'll do the deploy, we'll set it up, we'll go do that. So the productivity savings have been really great. Been really excited with that. Let me take like 2 more and then I'll get you out of here because I like to ship on time. Yes?
I'm not sure if you'll be able to answer this, but do you know, what's your vision for BizTalk server?
Yeah.
I think we use BizTalk a lot, pretty much, pretty much in every project configuration, and I received too many BizTalk sessions, so I was kind of curious.
Yeah, it's not my area, so I don't have a definitive answer for you on the roadmap. I know a couple of the guys that are on the team that go off and go run it. Do you have, yeah. Yeah, well, yeah, it's the Avocode piece for the monitoring stuff. In fact, Victor, who's on stage, was part of Avocode and joined our team on stage with me in the keynote. And a lot of the first level of data that we showed on Monday was pulling Avocode performance monitoring and those sort of pieces back into the system. So that absolutely works, incredibly well. And I think also part of your question, though, as well was, what's our roadmap for it? What are we doing with respect to tools and tooling for it and things like that? Is that right, or is it? Yeah. Yes. Yeah, so BizTalk server, programming roadmap and the rest of that. Yeah. Yeah, if it isn't what the roadmap. So I'm not on that team and I don't own it. I do know a few folks on it. If you want to ping me, I'll hook you up directly with the folks and we can get you their guidance directly. Just send mail to Jason Z. Okay. Yes, sir. Let me take 2 more and then we'll shut down. Oh, thank you. You threw that softball right up here. Thank you. I like that. Yeah, it's. I will tell you what. The stuff there's plenty of stuff that's got me most excited, but the one that I'm really looking forward to because I see the immediate productivity wins, and I just hear my own people in Building 41 just like asking for it. It's all the Scrum Agile task board stuff that's in there. Like every time anybody sees that, it's like, oh, thank God. You know what I mean? Because the Post-it note things are kind of cool. If you come to my building, we've got Scrum stand-ups. There's one just outside of my office for the SharePoint DevTools team actually, and the languages team is actually also down around the hall. And so if you come through the building, you will still see on the third floor, the great big list of the Post-it notes and the stories as they're kind of going through. And we'll have the stand-ups there. In fact, outside of one of our conference rooms, it's kind of funny. Maybe you guys have the same thing, but. For a while, one of the folks on my of our LCA staff, the lawyers, they're coming over to visit and like, what the hell is wrong with your hallways over here? They're always so kind of cluttered, and the paint looks horrible. What is going on? I just don't understand that. Okay, do you know what I'm talking about? Do you know what that is? It's called stand-up, baby. So I'm working on this thing, right? You know what I mean? So like every day there's a stand-up with shoes against the wall, right about this height. You know what I'm saying? So we got the Post-it notes and that stuff, and people standing up, and the paint's starting to peel off, and that's okay because they're getting tasks done, which I love. But that feature, I'm looking forward to seeing that replaced with nice big touch monitors. And I still want people like humans coming in and talking to each other. But we also have parts of the team that are working in other parts of the country or other parts of the world as well. And so to be able to have the same core base and drag and drop and all that kind of stuff. And at some point, the Connect SDK is coming out. I think it's like next month or something like that. I'm thinking we need a demo with Connect and taskboards and drag and drop. Yeah. Talk about C++, baby. That sounds like a fun C++ app. I want to write that. Yes, sir.
So, there's been, over the years, a number of pretty sort of monumental changes that have started out at the group that you now run. To pick a milestone one, say, when C# came out. If you were to pick something right now looking forward at VNext and say, what's the thing that the people in this room ought to have their eye looking forward to and say there's a game changer up ahead?
Yeah.
What would you say that is the thing that we should have our eyes out for?
Yeah, and the one I would pick, I just want to pick one to be very laser focused. I'd talk about cloud. I think actually is a big inflection point because we're doing a bunch of stuff. You heard what I'm doing is kind of infrastructure, self-service, all the rest of that kind of stuff. I think it's really going to be a game changer with respect to how we write, compose code, manage code, everything else. The way in which you do that cloud, because you're going to be doing much, much more kind of consumption of services, writing of services and things like that. That also is why I'm so compelled to go draw that picture and say, geez, if that's the world we're headed to, I need development and operations working incredibly closely together, or that's going to be a real problem. So that's why this integration and everything else is so important to us, kind of getting all this stuff pulled in. So I think it's going to be a big game changer. And just to be clear, because I know sometimes there's confusion on this, we're not trying to force you into saying tomorrow you must be using cloud. Right, we've got solutions. You heard Robert talk about Hyper-V, on-premise. You can use private cloud. We're going to make the new stuff kind of grow. You heard how my plan for evolving my own software as a service. But if you're extrapolating out 10 years and that kind of stuff, I absolutely think that we'll have a ton of cloud. The Office 365, great kind of solutions. I think we'll see more and more of that kind of thing, and that will change the way that we kind of write, construct, architect code, the way we build the code, the way we work together as teams, and things like that as well. All right, so our back door just opened. I'd like to ship on time. Thanks a lot, guys. See you later.